This is the Gospel Briefing. I'm Charles King. Today, the US men crash out of the World Cup after a phone call that shouldn't have been made. A 167-year-old Supreme Court ruling gets a strange new echo, and an anime trend of all things is quietly pointing toward home. Headlines, heartbeat, hope. Let's get into it. The US men's national team is out of the World Cup. Belgium beat them 4-1 in the round of 16. It wasn't close, it wasn't controversial. Belgium was simply the better team. But the story around the match, that's another thing entirely. In the days before kickoff, US striker Folarin Balogun received a red card in group play, and President Trump, publicly and then privately, called FIFA's president to complain. Reporting confirms the call happened. FIFA declined to reverse the card. Now, set aside for a moment what you think about the president. Set aside what you think about soccer. The deeper question here is about the proper use of authority. Proverbs 21:1 says, "The king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will." Scripture does not forbid leaders from using their office. It assumes they will. What Scripture warns against is authority spent on the small thing when the great things are pressing in. There is a category in the Bible for leaders who major in minors. Jesus called it straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. You don't have to have a strong opinion about a red card to notice this. A phone call was made, a game was lost anyway, and the team went home. Sometimes the most humbling thing God does with our leverage is let it not matter. Last week, in a church in the shadow of the Supreme Court, two families sat down together who, by every earthly measure, should not have been in the same room. The descendants of Dred Scott and the descendants of Chief Justice Roger Taney. Taney, if you don't remember the name, wrote the 1857 Dred Scott decision. He ruled that Black Americans, whether enslaved or free, were not and could never be citizens of the United States. Historians routinely call it the worst decision in the history of the court. Abraham Lincoln called it a moral abomination. It helped light the fuse of the Civil War. 167 years later, the great-great-grandchildren of both men met in a sanctuary. They prayed together. They spoke of reconciliation. They spoke of what it costs and what it's worth. And the reason NPR was there covering it is because the Supreme Court, this very term, is once again wrestling with hard questions about race and citizenship and who counts as an American. Here is what I keep coming back to. Reconciliation is not a political program. It is a Christian doctrine. 2 Corinthians 5:18 says God has reconciled us to himself through Christ and has given us the ministry of reconciliation. Given, not offered as a suggestion. You cannot legislate what happened in that sanctuary. You can only receive it. The Scott family did not owe the Taney family a meeting, and yet they came, because the gospel does something no court ruling can undo and no court ruling can accomplish. The court will decide what it decides. But the deeper work of a nation's healing was happening in a church on a Tuesday between people whose ancestors were on opposite sides of the worst ruling America ever handed down. That's not a footnote. That's the story. Third story, and I promise this is a real news item. Christianity Today ran a piece this week on the surging popularity of Japanese anime and manga in American culture. If you've got teenagers, you already know. If you don't, take my word for it. The aisle at your library has changed. The writer's observation is this. A lot of anime, underneath the swords and the spirits and the giant robots, is preoccupied with themes of longing. Longing for a home you've never seen. Longing for a world that isn't broken. Longing for a self that is finally at peace. And she argues, that's not accidental. That's a human hunger showing up in an unexpected place. C.S. Lewis called it sehnsucht, the ache for our true country. Hebrews 11 calls it looking for a better country, a heavenly one. The writer of Hebrews says the saints of old confessed they were strangers and exiles on the earth. Every culture makes art about this ache, because every human heart carries it. Here is the pastoral point. When your kids, or your neighbors, or you yourself, find yourselves drawn to stories about lost worlds and broken heroes and impossible longings, that is not a spiritual problem. That is the image of God, groaning. Romans 8 says the whole creation groans. Anime is not the answer to the ache, but it's honest about the ache, and honesty is a starting place. The gospel meets people where the longing already is. Now to your quick briefs. Ukrainian President Zelensky is at the NATO summit in Turkey, pressing for more air defense interceptors after another wave of Russian strikes. Behind every missile is a family in a basement. Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Pray for the church in Ukraine tonight. Explosions in Damascus injured 18 people during a visit by French President Macron. Macron is safe. His meeting with the Syrian president continued. Syria's Christians who have endured over a decade of war need your prayers more than your headlines. Back home, Maine Senate candidate Graham Plattner is facing calls to end his campaign after a sexual assault allegation surfaced. The specifics are still developing. Proverbs 18:17. The one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. Wait for facts. Pray for the truth to surface. Pray for the woman involved. And a 4th of July with canceled parades. Emergency rooms across the country reported record heat-related illness this week. However you frame the causes, Christians are called to steward the world we were given. Genesis 2:15, to work it and keep it. That verb has not expired. You're reading Romans 9. Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. What does that even mean? Most apps say pray about it. Bible Copilot walks you through the Hebrew Paul was quoting, the historical context, and how Calvin and Wesley each read it in under 30 seconds. Trusted AI for Bible study, not generic AI. 5 stars in the App Store. Get your first month of Pro free at mybiblecopilot.com/gospel. That's mybiblecopilot.com/gospel. Bible Copilot. Today's verse is Hebrews 11:16. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. A better country? That's what the anime kids are reaching for. That's what the Scott and Taney families glimpsed together in that sanctuary. That's what the fans in the stadium last night, cheering for a team that couldn't quite deliver, actually wanted underneath the wanting. Every ache in today's news points home. Thanks for listening to the Gospel Briefing. If today's episode helped you think more clearly, send it to one person who needs it. The world is loud. The word is louder. And there is a city being prepared for you that no election, no ruling, no war, and no final score can shake. I'll see you tomorrow.